Welcome to edugogo, the new show here on EduQuest, where we feature campaigns that we pick for our Indiegogo partner page. And today I'm with Sam Muirhead, and he's the project lead of Year of Open Source. And as the title says, probably we will see something for about a year, but Sam, I let you explain the idea.
Yeah, well, basically I'm going to take this idea of open source that's getting quite a lot of coverage in the media and being talked about quite a lot, this idea of basically allowing access to a product, allowing people to see how products are made, how services kind of work, and allowing other people to use that same kind of framework and adapt it and modify it and things. So this is the basic idea of open source, and it comes from software originally, and I'm basically seeing how far this idea has spread and how far it could spread into real life. I'm taking quite an extreme way of going about that. Basically, I'm going to try and spend an entire year using open source options for every aspect of my life. So whether that's computer software and things like that, but also physical things like the clothes I wear, the shoes I use, the toothpaste I use, things like that.
And do you think that Berlin probably is a good spot to start with it, because there's so much going on in this culture thing? So probably we have this guerrilla gardening and also all those little shops in the center of Berlin. So how do you think are your chances that you can still maintain a good lifestyle in Berlin?
There will be some difficult areas along the way, definitely, but I think Berlin is absolutely the best place in the entire world to do this. I mean, I'm from New Zealand myself, which is quite a small place on the edge of the world. It's a lovely place, but it's very difficult to do a project like this there, I think. Whereas in Berlin, I'm kind of using this project as the basis of a documentary. It's going to be a series of different web videos, at least one every week, and plenty of writing and discussion about it as well. And so with this, I don't want to just show how open source has kind of evolved on the international scale, but also try and present a kind of a portrait of Berlin, because this is an amazing city to be in if you're interested in this kind of thinking in terms of open design, kind of people freeing their designs, allowing other people to download and use them. Just around the corner I've got Open Design City, which is a maker lab where people are 3D printing, they're hacking different designs, they're making cargo bikes, all sorts of things like that. There's the School of Open, part of the peer-to-peer university, which is doing amazing things with open education. They're also got a base in Berlin as well. Also the big Sea-Base Hacker Club is certainly a pretty big part of this as well. This is the part of Berlin where the Pirate Party kind of sprung from. This is a very internet-influenced political party which has now got, I think, 10% of the vote here in Berlin. So it's kind of, Berlin's a very forward-thinking place. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening here, and I want to both use that to help me in my project, but also want to kind of show some of this in my videos and explain to the world just what an amazing place this is. So.
And well, of course you also want, as you said, educate people what open source is and how they possibly could replace things in their lives with open source approaches. So what do you think are the easiest things that you can start with to replace?
The easiest and the most established is certainly software. I mean, open source has a very strong scene around software, of course. Things like the Linux kernel, which you'll find in all kind of supercomputers behind and all sorts of different servers and things like that. You'll find the Apache web server. There's just a huge, wide variety of open source software options that are out there that work very well, that have great communities of people kind of providing support for them and working on them and things like that. So I think the basic kind of switch over to software for me and for other people is generally relatively easy. One thing where I'm going to struggle as a filmmaker, I think, is a video editing software. There's no real open source alternative that's quite up there with the proprietary leaders at the moment, things like Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere. So I'm going to try out a few a few new open source options, and a few of the more established options that are kind of workarounds to get them to work. So it'll be an interesting learning experience for me when learning about this the software. But there are some great options out there which I think I should be able to do a good job of telling people about and spreading the word about.
Mm. And why do you think should people use open source instead of just taking their credit card and buying a product from the shelf?
This is something that I'm going to be kind of trying to work out over the course of the year. The main thing I'm going to try and get people to do is at least consider it and think before they go and just go out and buy something without even thinking about it. Try and think a little bit more about the products they buy and what effect they have on society, or whether these products kind of restrict freedom of the user, or whether they allow other people to modify them and things like that. So I think as I go through the year, I'll be able to find more and more areas where it's easier to use open source, and some areas, of course, where it's very, very difficult or perhaps impossible. I'm kind of aiming for 100% open source, but I already know at this stage that's an impossible dream. That's just kind of the goal I'm heading for. But this project is about the attempt. It's about showing the process, and in that way I hope to show not only what open source options exist and what could exist, but also how closed source, how proprietary so much of our current lifestyles are.
And do you think that open source basically could also be not only a better model for society, but probably also help people in economic times like we have? So if people really start, as we saw with the big Etsy phenomenon in the States, that people have skills, and probably if they know how to do stuff, that they can basically also earn a living on the side?
Absolutely. I think there are all number of different business models that are starting to appear with open source, both in terms of software and also hardware. I think the Arduino microcontroller is a very good example of this. This is an Italian company that makes a very simple kind of single board computer. They allow anybody to use the designs to make their own versions and things like that. The only thing that they hold on to is the trademark, this name Arduino, and so they've basically built up a very strong brand while still not kind of holding on to their trade secrets or anything like that, holding on to their plans. They've been very open, very transparent, and they've basically been rewarded by that. People tend to not buy a cheap kind of bulk-produced Chinese version that's exactly the same for 10 euros less. They tend to go, I'm going to buy a real Arduino from the Italian factory. So it's there are all sorts of different business models and software and hardware that people can use.
And so in this year of open source, we will see, as you said, probably one video per week where you document your progress. And what else are you planning to put into this documentary? As I saw, you have different perks, of course, on Indiegogo. One of them is if a company has an open source product, you will basically take it and play around with it and document this part.
Absolutely. So that's kind of the idea of just showing people what open source options are out there. So what I'm offering is not an endorsement to companies. I'm not going to kind of, you pay me money and I'll say your product's great. It's going to be like, I want to look at it. I want to try it out against what other options there are available. Tell people about it. Spend enough time with the product to actually really work out its pros and cons, and then give it an honest review with constructive criticism at the end. So really make people think about how open source software, open source hardware can work. Yeah. So there'll be all sorts of updates and things coming up now, and the project is actually starting in 1 week's time. So you'll see the first my first tentative steps into the world of open source very, very soon. So that'll be quite exciting.
Great.
Yeah.
And people can follow you, of course, on the website, yearofopensource.com, I think.
.net, yes.
.net. And also Facebook, Twitter, everywhere.
Yes, indeed. So one of the interesting things is that I have to drop my own personal Facebook and Twitter and things like that in order to do this project, because they're not open source. But a huge part of this project is about opening out to people, explaining the idea to people who aren't already involved in open source. And unfortunately, those people are all on Facebook and Twitter. So that means I keep my Year of Open Source page and try and communicate with them, tell them about the world of open source through those programs.
Great. Anything else we should mention?
One other thing as well, just from an educational point of view as well, I know you guys have an educational slant. I'm definitely going to be looking at the way that open source affects education as well. The way that over the last decade or so there's been more and more initiatives with collaborative education, more kind of people can specialize a little bit more, kind of take ideas and modules from different parts of the world. And I'm going to be using language learning as one particular way of doing this. This is because I probably wouldn't be able to properly evaluate a new way of learning science or something like that. I don't have a scientific study background, but I've studied a number of languages before, and so I'm going to be trying to learn some Turkish this year. I live in the Turkish quarter of Berlin, in Kreuzberg, and so I hear Turkish all around me. I've got people living in my building speaking Turkish, and I hear it all the time, and I don't speak a word. And so I'm going to see what open source options there are in terms of collaborative methods, in terms of open source software, language learning software that I can use in order to try and learn some Turkish along the way. So that should be quite a fun way of looking at open source education.
Absolutely. Great. So good luck with the final weeks, and of course we promote you as good as we can, and well, looking forward to your weekly videos and your year of open source.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me here.